Welcome to the Planning Commission meeting, 4:30 p.m., Thursday, February 27th, 2020. First item of business is to approve the minutes of the January 30th, 2020 meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Everybody signify by aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Item 3, new business, is to review proposed language for solar ordinance. And we'll look for staff's report.
Okay. First thing I'd like to note is that this is just a draft document that we put together for discussion purposes. As you'll note in the information that we provided, it has not been reviewed by the city attorney, in part because he's been on vacation, but so we still would need to go through that process to see what changes might be necessary. I would, though, like to begin by having you go to the pictures that have been provided at the end of the document. And those were put together by John Nisley, and he's not able to join us today. But what they illustrate are the different types of solar energy systems that are currently in use, and the regulations that we have put together kind of address those types of systems. So I thought before we get into the the language part of the document that we might take a look at the pictures to get a little bit better understanding of what we're talking about. So attachment 2 starts with ground-mounted solar energy systems. And so you've got 2 photos that are provided there. I think the photo at the top is of a size that perhaps fits with the dwelling unit. The bottom photo, John did this intentionally, kind of shows you maybe a solar system that's maybe a little bit too big for the property. If you go to the next page, there are 2 pictures again of ground-mounted solar energy systems. So a lot of times they're single pole with panels on them. The attachment 3 are roof or building mounted systems. There's 2 photos provided there. One is a flush mounted system. The one on the lower part of the page is what I'm going to call a flat roof type of system. And we already have within the community at least, the flat roof types of systems. The 4th attachment is a system that is integrated into the roof. Do we have any like that in town?
Not so far, no.
Okay. So it's a different type of shingle, I guess, is the best way to explain, what it is and how it works. The 5th attachment 5, that's shows you what a hot water system, how that works. So you have water that circulates through the pipes and is heated in that manner. On the following page, we have four illustrations of different types of community systems. In the top corner to the left side, that's where you have individual buildings that are selling to a utility firm. So that kind of falls under the community solar umbrella. On the left side, the lower panel, that is just one building, and so that could be it could be a townhome project, it could be a condo. Apparently, in this particular case, it's kind of a two-way system where if there's excess electricity being generated, it goes into the community utility system, and if there isn't, then the community utility system feeds back into the building. On the right-hand side, on the top, this is an off-site shared system where the system feeds individual housing units. Another description for that is like a solar farm. And then the bottom panel on the right-hand side is just a community solar system and the I guess the potential ways that they can be financed. Going to the next picture, which is the final one. This is shows you two different pictures of solar farms, and so those are much bigger than anything that we've previously looked at. I don't know if you do any driving in the I would say maybe a 50-60 mile radius, you're starting to see locations with that number of panels. I know on Highway 60 there's one. Actually, there's one that appears to be under construction. I'm fairly close to the Mankato area.
There's one couple by Mankato. The Nuns at Good Counsel have a couple.
Okay. So, those are, you can find those in the area. So now going back to the staff report, our department, Community Development Department, has prepared the proposed regulations. These regulations would apply to all of our land use designations, all of our zoning districts. Solar zoning requirements are currently found in most municipal zoning ordinances. And so the purpose of the ordinance is to provide appropriate locations and facilitate the development of solar energy systems, but at the same time establish some performance standards in order to protect the public and surrounding properties from any adverse effects. We took a look at approximately 15 different zoning ordinances and tried to, find appropriate pieces, not necessarily from each, but parts that we thought would be appropriate for the city of New Ulm. I think that a lot of the items that we've identified for our regulations come from the City of Redwood Falls, City of Faribault. They both have look like they had the same ordinance, and so we use that a fair amount. As I noted previously, City Attorney's Office hasn't looked at this. Solar energy systems are becoming an accepted property use, and I think they are expected to increase in the future. So today, I guess what we're looking for you is kind of your opinion as to the proposed regulations. Are they adequate? And then secondly, is there additional requirements or fewer requirements that would be appropriate? Our recommendation is if you find the regulations to be appropriate, or if you find the regulations to be appropriate with changes, we would then meet with the city attorney's office and review them and then put them into a ordinance form and schedule a public hearing on the adoption of an ordinance for that purpose. So motions have been provided in the report, as well as then the supporting documentation. The way that the regulations have been laid out is we've got, let's see, we have 9 different sections, major sections. So Section A consists of definitions, and we've got 8 of those. And most of the definitions are description of the different types of solar systems that we could have. And we reviewed many of those in the pictures that have been provided. The second section, or Section B, is residential districts. And then we go into further detail there. I guess I'd like to go through all of the sections that we have and then come back to B. Section C is business, industry, and agricultural residence districts. So we're basing this on the districts in our zoning ordinance. Section D is other applicable standards, which would apply to all zoning districts. Section E is approvals. Section F is aesthetics. Section G is easements. Section H is abandonment of a system. And then Section I has to do with heritage preservation, landmarks, and districts. So let's go back to Section B. Section B and Section C are set up the same. So in Section B, we have number 1 is on ground-mounted, solar energy systems. Item 2 is on roof or building-mounted solar energy systems. I might note that we use the term solar energy systems to kind of describe that it's everything. That's a kind of a encompassing term for this discussion. The business, industrial, and agricultural section is set up the same way. We've got ground-mounted, and then we have roof-mounted. Now, within each section, we further break it down into, with the ground-mounted, there are 4 sections. With the roof-mounted, there are 5, and they're small letters. And so the headings for those small letters is the location, setbacks, height, and coverage. And again, this is something that we took from other ordinances. That is the approach that we found in many of the ordinances. For the roof-mounted, you will find the same subject areas with the addition of a flat roof area. So, the regulations in the residential district, for location, we're looking at rear yard only. Setbacks, you'd have to, comply with, setbacks, for the rear and side yard that are currently, part of our code. You'd have to be 5 feet from any other principal or accessory structure. And then you'd have to be located a minimum of 30 feet from a building located on an adjacent lot or parcel. As far as height, shouldn't exceed 15 feet in height. A taller system may be permitted by conditional use. From a coverage standpoint, we're saying 120 feet is the maximum. If you want to go over 120, you can apply for a conditional use permit. And item 3 is the square footage of the solar energy system shall be considered in determining the maximum amount of accessory buildings and structures permitted on the lot. I think, we limit in our residential districts accessory buildings to 1,000 square feet. And so, solar energy systems really are no different than an accessory structure. They cover your yard area. And so this is, I would say, a vast majority of the ordinances that we looked at had this requirement. We did find one, I remember, that specifically said, no, that this isn't part of the calculation. So, in the roof-mounted section, again, we're looking at principal or accessory buildings. They may not extend beyond the exterior perimeter wall of the building, so that's on the side. If it's on the side wall of a building, you can't go out beyond that wall. And then they have to be flush-mounted if they're facing a street. Setback, we'd require a 3-foot clearance around the edges to facilitate emergency responder access. Again, that was a requirement that was fairly common to most of the ordinances that we saw. And then with height, no part of the system could extend beyond the peak of the roof. Coverage, there would be no coverage limitation. And then for flat roofs, we established some standards as far as its use. And I would say the probably the major item there is that you can go higher, but if you go higher, you have to be set further into the roof so that it's maybe less visible from the ground. Get into then business, industrial, and agricultural. And there are similar standards, but I would say that we allow a greater degree of flexibility in locating solar energy systems. For example, you can be 10 feet from any other principal or accessory structure. You can be minimum of 30 feet from all buildings located, again, on adjacent lots, so that's similar. From a height standpoint, we're at 15 feet, but again, you can use a conditional use permit process. From a coverage standpoint, we're saying 15% of the lot size or 1,000 square feet. When you get to roof-mounted systems, it's fairly similar to the residential regulations. Again, there is no, on coverage, there's no limitation. So then there are other applicable standards for all zoning districts. Basically, what we're doing there is, I guess, ensuring that the systems are in compliance with, electrical, plumbing, building code requirements. We want, any type of electrical or service line to be buried. A visible disconnect is provided. And then there are various other regulations that they should be maintained in good repair. I would note that the last two, 16 and 17, there we note that a solar energy system exceeding 40 kW shall require a conditional use permit. And any community solar or solar farm project must be located in an industrial district and shall require a conditional use permit. Approvals, if you want to install a system, you need a building permit. And we also refer to a supplemental application. Really, the supplemental part of it is a form that we want to be completed that indicates that the Public Utilities Commission is aware of what's taking place. And then there also is a utility notification. So if they intend to feed back into the utility grid, there needs to be what is called an interconnection agreement. As far as aesthetics, we're asking that colors blend as much as possible with the roof, that reflection angles not result in glare that impacts adjoining, if it's residences or businesses, or adjoining properties, I guess we can say. That there's screening from the public right-of-way and immediately adjacent residences. And then that the city would have the option if additional landscaping or other means of screening was considered necessary. Item G has to do with easements. And what we indicate here is that the property owner is responsible for securing easements from their neighbors to protect the way that's, or the manner in which sunlight gets to the panels. So if you don't have an easement and the neighbor next door decides to put up a garage or something that blocks your panels, if you don't have an easement, nothing we can do about it. So that's an obligation of the property owner. The second item is that solar energy systems cannot be located in any existing easement areas. Item H has to do with abandonment. So if a system is abandoned, there's a procedure established in which those eventually could be removed. The final item has to do with heritage preservation landmarks or districts. Anything that is roof or wall mounted has to be reviewed and approved by the Heritage Preservation Commission. Anything that's ground mounted would not be permitted. And again, we took these requirements from other communities. So that kind of is a summary of the information that you have in front of you. And I'm sure you've got questions.
Thank you, Dave. Go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman, I have one question, or two questions. One is, the 120 square feet for a backyard system seems to me small. Maybe I'm not educated enough on the solar systems, but like say a 10 by 12 isn't a very big area. Just a question on that one. And the other one, we talked about screening. That looks like it could be left kind of vague and a little open to somebody's interpretation. If I read that right, if I have a house facing east-west and a panel up on the roof and the street is north-south, people driving along the street could be opposed to my solar panel. And I'd have to try to screen that. Maybe I'm reading too much into that, I'm not sure. When you say,
I think we felt that if it's on the roof, that we didn't see a problem
Okay.
with that. I think it's more the ground mounted that
Okay.
that we were looking
Understand.
for screening from, and maybe we need to clarify that. Your first comment had to do
the
with.
total square footage on a backyard system of 120
Yeah.
square feet.
We took that from the Redwood Falls and the Faribault ordinance. I guess we could check to see what other, I thought most communities were kind of in that
In that
particular,
area. And
yeah.
that might have to do with a little bit of building code. It used to be, you didn't need a permit for like a garden shed at 120 square feet. That got bumped up to 200. What the 120 will accommodate, I'm not quite sure if will take care of the residence itself or if it's undersized.
Sure.
But like I said, most of them were that 120 square feet is what we saw.
But they could come for a conditional use
They
permit to
could
go,
come for a
to go
conditional,
larger.
Yeah.
right.
I just looked at that, I like to avoid as many conditional use permits, you know, everybody wants to come back and it's just
Yeah.
extra work, but
Right.
But how much?
that's a pretty good standard, I just had the question,
Right.
so.
And some of the ordinances, they get pretty limiting to what they're limiting in the yard.
Mm-hmm.
Not that they're eliminating all the solar use, but it can get pretty limited to what they're doing once you start going through and following, that you gotta be 120 square feet, follow the setbacks, has to be screened. You can get pretty limiting to where you are allowed to do.
Do we have anything, I guess I'm saying if you have your home, you have an empty lot next to you that requires that you have to have a structure on that property in order to have solar? You know, I mean, I'm kind of going by like, if you own your home and you say you have a house next door that's removed, but
Mhm.
now you want to build a detached structure, you can't do so unless you have a house there.
That's correct.
Correct. So
This is,
would
the
that follow?
solar energy panel is being treated as an accessory use.
Okay.
So in order to have an accessory use, you have to have a primary use, which in a residential area is pretty much limited to a
Okay.
residential unit.
Or come in for a variance like
Or
we've-
come in for a
Okay,
variance, yeah.
it's just, you know,
Do we have, current solar systems in place in homes in the community?
There are, I can think of two right offhand. There's one solar array mounted on a garage that is actually feeding back into the utility system. And there is one hydronic one that's used for hot water that's on a garage roof also.
And would they be grandfathered in then? As
That
far
was
as-
my question too, or do they qualify with these stipulations? do you
Yes,
know?
right now the
They would
ones that we
qualify.
have are all pretty much within the ordinances that's here.
So did they get building permits for those?
Yeah.
So we would know about any technically then?
Clay may be able to help us here, but I believe in your story today on the Public Utilities Commission meeting, there was a statement that the PUC was paying, I think, 6 commercial and 7 residential units. Was it?
Yeah, that's correct. I'm not sure where they are exactly, but, and
Yeah, so there are 13 at least in
Okay.
the community.
And then in the past, had they had to have an agreement then with the PUC, or is that new?
No, they've had, if they're gonna feed back into the system, they've had to have. an
They've had that agreement
Yeah.
in place. Okay.
And I should note that we did meet with representatives of the Public Utilities Commission twice to review this, and they actually encouraged us to establish an ordinance.
If you put up one of these solar panels and all of a sudden, after the fact, you find out that somebody's complaining about the glares from the panels, what are the recourses for that person? So if I'm a neighbor in the backyard and nothing happens, all of a sudden you're putting up the panels and all of a sudden, at a certain time of day, it's blinding the heck out of my house, or I can't see. Is there gonna be any can that neighbor do anything, or how's that procedure work down the road?
I think that's a good question for the
That's a
attorney.
good yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that one, because out in Las Vegas, this is a different one, they put a big hotel, and all of a sudden the glare from blinded people in the other swimming pool, and it was just horrible. In a little bit smaller scale, but you
Right.
never know. I mean,
No.
might as well try to nip it in the butt before it
Right,
happens.
and we talked about that, and that's where the screening provisions come in quite a bit on that kind of stuff. But how do you, like Rod says, how do you screen one that's up on a roof? How do you provide the screening for that and still be
Right.
able to get the sun to
Right?
do the job? So that's why a lot of it's limited to the backyard. So we don't have to deal with the right of way and stuff.
Is there a cost on this when you apply for an application?
Well, there'll be
Cost.
there'd be a building permit cost,
Okay.
yeah. And I don't know if PUC has a cost or not. I'm not sure.
Yeah. And if you apply for a conditional use permit, there's a fee for that as well.
So you made a note that's stated that in here, that if it's not in operation in 12 months, it may need to be removed. You know, say we see something that the panels are in indefinite disrepair on a home and the homeowner can't get it done, do we then fall onto our blighting ordinance or ordinance that something's in disrepair to correct the issue?
Right,
I mean, do we see like, say, a windstorm came in and they didn't make the necessary repairs and half the
There's-
panels are on or half are not, and we seem at a danger or,
state statute that addresses that for building code issues.
okay,
If it's in disrepair, that you can go through, municipality can require the repair or raising of such structure. So then my understanding is if the owner chooses not to, then it goes through the municipality and it can be put back on their taxes if the municipality ends up fixing it or tearing it down.
okay.
We also have a requirement, in these regulations, which reads, all solar energy systems shall be operable and maintained in good repair. Now, granted, that's subjective, but operable is pretty clear. Either it works or it doesn't work. So if it doesn't work, I think that regulation then could serve as a basis for further action.
So would that be something that the PUC then would notify the city that we're not getting any electricity from this customer anymore? Something needs to be checked out here?
We might not know because some of the customers are just gonna be feeding their own structure, their own house.
Okay, but I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
But I
it would
mean-
be a potential if they're feeding back into the line, PUC would know about that, yeah.
correct.
But it probably would require some kind of evaluation by staff as to whether something is operating or not, and I don't quite know how that would be accomplished, but.
Yeah.
And then I would have another question, say some panels had to be removed, are these safe to be removed and just hauled to a regular landfill? Are there special provisions for these for the future that we're discussing for our community?
That, I don't know if they can be recycled or what, I guess we haven't, looked into that.
That we're handling them safe manner, not that they're just general trash, but,
reclaiming metals,
Or-
et cetera, whatever.
Yeah.
I know that at one time the Broadway House had, I don't know, maybe 5, 6 panels, and they were removed and disposed of. Not exactly where they went, I don't know, but that did take place.
Okay.
Did I hear you say before that you felt that because of some of the language in here that this made it, I don't want to say difficult, harder for residential homeowners to implement?
Some of the ordinances are written that way that we looked at they get very limiting to what you can do, and it
Right,
kind of weeds out some areas and some lots.
Mhm.
Ours is pretty, I mean, we took a look at it, and I mean, solar is one of the alternative energies, and
right,
need to be able to get it in, but we also don't want it in the front yard or the side yard, and
right.
so yeah, so it's limiting to a point, but stuff can still be accomplished.
And if, and this is based on my unfamiliarity with the building permit process. So if I'm coming into the community and I want to build a home, and I take out a building permit, and I'm planning on putting some solar pieces of technology in there, that's part of the building permit process then, to have that reviewed?
Correct, that
Or-
would have to be part of the review process,
the-
and if, you know, if it's, whatever has to be filled out with the public utilities would
Right.
have to be done beforehand,
Right,
before the building permit's issued, whether it's just a standalone or if they're actually selling back into the grid.
right.
Yeah, they've got a whole process, that they have to go through with, solar energy to fill out.
I'm thinking, do you think that anyone who's interested in this is more interested in for their own personal use versus hooking into the grid?
I guess it depends on what they can generate and what they can sell back to the grid. If they can, you know, net out zero on their utility bill or get close, I think it's something that they're looking at.
Right.
I know, the one that I know of on the garage, that's what he was looking at, that he could get pretty close to a zero net out.
Oh,
But there again, it's what kind of cost you want to put into it, and the infrastructure for it itself, and selling back to the utilities, and what kind of lifespan it actually has, what your payback's going to be.
yeah.
And that might change year by year with the tax credits and everything else they have
Yeah.
going for it.
I think tax credits have been a motivating force
Right.
for the installation of solar.
But now with, like, if you know, look on those integrated systems with the shingles and stuff, those are getting more and more refined, and supposedly some of the products are getting pretty close to the cost of architectural shingles. So that might be something that's getting looked at more and more, yeah.
Right. I mean, they're barely noticeable.
Right.
I was wondering if to your question about, do they have a lot of reflection off those roof mounted, where are they?
The roof mounted, not so much, I would say on the regular 312 or 412 pitch roof, you probably wouldn't get anything, but if we get some on some of these two-story houses with 612 or 812 pitch, yeah, you might have some
Might have some reflection there.
issues, yeah.
But that would be something that would be looked at during the review of the building permit process.
Correct, yeah.
Any other discussion? I'm glad everybody asked some questions here, you know, I mean, and still subject to a public hearing yet on that aspect, but, we have a couple motions that are prepared by staff of, look for a motion to either accept or,
I'd make a motion that we direct the staff to prepare the solar energy ordinance and schedule public hearing on the ordinance.
got a motion?
I second that.
Got a motion and a second. Everybody signify by aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. So we'll look forward to our public hearing on March 26th, 2020.
Correct.
And go to our next item of business would be report from staff on city council decisions concerning planning commission matters in February of 2020.
Okay, at the City Council's February 4th meeting, they unanimously approved with conditions the variance request of Al Paler to allow a 0-foot side yard setback in order to construct 2 twin homes. They unanimously approved with conditions a conditional use permit to Tim Reiki to allow the location of a residential unit on the first floor of a building located in a downtown B2 zoning district, and that's across the street at 101 North Broadway. And he has paid the filing fees, so to me that's indication that he is proceeding. He's going to proceed with the project.
My understanding, yep.
Council also unanimously approved a motion to accept your recommendation to allow 0 lot line standards in the R2 and the R3 zoning district. And at that same meeting, they conducted the first reading of that zoning ordinance. They also, at the February 4th meeting, received 2 petitions to vacate rights-of-way. One in Block 89 North, which is bounded by North Broadway, 16th North, 17th North, and North State Street. North State Street is a closed street. It's part of a larger parking lot. And the public hearing date on that vacation is scheduled for March 3rd, so that's coming up at the next council meeting. And then they also received a petition to vacate a portion of Monument Street. That is between Herman Heights Park and the parking area for Herman Heights Park. And that would also be considered at the March 3rd meeting. At the February 18th meeting, they had a public hearing on a loan to DLC in the amount of $250,000, and that was approved, and that is to, I assume, assist with the new building that has been constructed and that will be occupied by DLC. They had a public hearing on the final plat of Milford Heights 3rd edition, and that was approved with conditions. And then they conducted they waived the second reading on the ordinance relative to 0 lot line standards, and then voted to adopt that, which means that that will go into effect in the near future. That concludes.
Okay. Thank you. Item 4.2 would be Heritage Preservation Commission activities. Elwood?
Had no business come in front of the HPC.
Well,
I have one question.
Sure.
Dave, why didn't the request to vacate come to the planning commission? Why are they just handled directly by the city council?
The process for the vacation of rights-of-way is laid out in the city charter. And the charter says it starts with the city council. The petitions are submitted there. I guess there's nothing that would preclude the city council, if they wanted to refer it back to the planning commission, but that's the way the process is at the present time.
good to know. Any other questions? None being said, meeting adjourned.